Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Interpreting India. From geopolitical complexities to economic uncertainties, India faces critical challenges in its quest for a more prominent role on the world stage. This season, we at Carnegie India continue to bring voices from India and around the world to examine the role of technology, the economy, and international security in shaping India's future. Space applications have become increasingly important for countries for communication, navigation, natural resource and crop management, security, and governance. Towards this, countries are launching numerous satellites to space to enable them to perform these critical functions. However, space is also becoming increasingly congested with presence of large number of space debris, that is, non-functional space objects or fragments that threaten the ability of countries to perform space exploration. These space debris can move faster than a bullet and can pose safety risks to satellites and humans in space. Considering this risk, countries around the world are working on ways to remove these debris and prevent formation of new space debris. Today, we are going to discuss about the importance of zero debris approach that many countries are adopting to ensure that space remains sustainable. Joining us today to discuss this topic is Dr. Quentin Verspieren. Dr. Verspieren is a Space Safety Program and Protect Accelerator Coordinator at the Directorate of Operations in European Space Agency. In this role, he leads the development of ambitious European initiatives on debris mitigation and remediation and on space weather services. He is also a visiting assistant professor at the Science, Technology and Innovation Governance program of the Graduate School of Public Policy in the University of Tokyo. He is also an aerospace engineer and has a PhD in public policy. Dr. Verspieren, welcome to Interpreting India.
Thank you. Very nice to meet you.
So, Dr. Verspieren, my first question is, what is the zero debris approach that space agencies and companies around the world are adopting? And why is it important?
So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this podcast to discuss this very important topic of zero debris. So zero debris is a concept that emerged at the European Space Agency based on decades of efforts on space debris mitigation and remediation. What zero debris means at the European Space Agency is that all our missions that will enter design phase after 2030 will need to demonstrate that they will leave no debris in orbit. The political validation of what we call the ESA zero debris approach came in 2022 during the ESA Ministerial Conference of 2022, where the ministers in charge of space of all ESA member states issued a ministerial resolution that gave ESA the following mandate: to implement a zero debris approach to all ESA's mission and to encourage partners and other actors to pursue similar paths. So, in fact, a dual mandate that requires first an internal transformation at ESA, getting better on our ability to reduce the debris footprint of our mission, but also to work on capabilities to remove existing debris. And the second part of the mandate, which is to try to bring the community behind this concept of zero debris. And we have done that through various actions, including the Zero Debris Charter that we'll talk about a bit later. And as you rightly pointed out, there are now many countries in Europe and in the world that are, let's say, supporting this idea of a world that would be zero debris from 2030 onwards. What we do concretely at ESA, to the first part of this mandate, this internal transformation, is that we progressively strengthen, tighten the technical requirements that are applicable to ESA's missions. As a matter of fact, in November 2023, we adopted a new internal standard applicable to all our missions and to all the contracts that we're giving to the industry that really puts this space debris mitigation and remediation criteria to the level of the technological state of the art. So we are now implementing for ESA's mission the maximum that is feasible as of today. And what we want to be doing in the coming years is continue to push the technical level on space debris mitigation and remediation. And in parallel with developing these new technologies, tightening further and further the requirements applicable to ESA's mission. We want then to have new requirements in 2026 and final, let's say, zero debris technical standard in 2030.
Thank you very much, Dr. Verspieren. So you talked about technical standards. So what are countries essentially doing to adopt these standards? What are the technology practices and methods that are required to practice these standards and the approach? Can you give us some examples, please?
Yes, that is a very important question. So we can see a bit later exactly how each, let's say, supporter of zero debris is actually implementing it. But in general, we consider that a zero debris approach has 5 main tenets that also correspond to roughly the 5 technical targets of the Zero Debris Charter. And these 5 key tenets are, first, the need to drastically reduce debris generations through internal breakups and collisions. So for that, we need to advance on questions of collision avoidance, of passivations of satellite after the end of mission, so depleting the batteries, removing the fuel. It also concerns having structures that would be more resilient to fragmentation. The second tenet is what we call orbital clearance. It means that when you have finished the mission for which the satellite was designed, you remove it from useful orbit. And this goes through capabilities such as post-mission disposal, either by burning it in the atmosphere or putting it in a graveyard orbit, as well as, in case the satellite has an issue and becomes a debris, having it easy to be removed, what we call prepare for removal, so having an interface that would facilitate another satellite grabbing it and removing it from useful orbit. The third tenet is reducing the risk of satellite re-entry. You may have seen in the news recently that a bunch of batteries coming from the International Space Station re-entered the atmosphere, didn't fully burn, and end up falling on a house on Florida. This is something that we should not accept and that should not happen again. And this is one example, but there are frequent examples of pieces of debris that survive re-entry. So we need to work, for instance, on what we call design for demise, meaning the object will fully burn when re-entering the atmosphere. Or if we know that it cannot burn completely, this is often the case of Earth observation satellites. They have payloads that by definition are really strong. Then we make sure to have a purely controlled re-entry so that we can ensure that it re-enters, for instance, around Point Nemo, so this area in the Pacific where there is no trade routes and no inhabitants. The fourth tenet is space traffic coordination. We now launch so many objects, there are so many activities happening in space that we cannot just continue to do things on our side. We need to coordinate very well among agencies, among companies, among universities that are operating satellites to make sure that we don't collide with one another and that basically others are aware of what kind of maneuver we plan to do, where our satellite is. And finally, the fifth tenet is space surveillance and tracking, which means the ability to see what is happening in space, to detect space objects, to predict their trajectories. Because as you mentioned, we have a lot of debris in space. I can give you a figure, which is that debris of a size larger than 1 centimeter, that are debris that we cannot see, we cannot track at the moment. These debris are estimated to be around 1 million. And in low Earth orbit, as you rightfully pointed out, these debris move at a speed of around 30,000 kilometers an hour, so much faster than the bullet of a gun. And so at this speed, even a debris of a 1 centimeter size at impact with, for example, a satellite, has the same kinetic energy as a hand grenade, a military hand grenade. And so you can summarize it by saying that at the moment, we have 1 million hand grenades moving at a speed of around 30,000 kilometers an hour that we cannot see. And we have useful satellites and we have astronauts. So it's extremely important to develop further our ability to detect debris that are as small as possible.
Thank you for that, Dr. Verspieren. So you talked about that space is increasingly seeing presence from private actors as well, right? So in that case, what is the role of private sector to facilitate this approach? Is it purely government-led, or are there also involvement from the private sector? And also, how important it is to build commercial capacity to support this approach?
This is the most important question, I would say. And as a matter of fact, the answer is very simple. The transition will be led and enabled by the private sector. Because really, just look at how most agencies are working. At the European Space Agency, so we design satellites, we make requirements, but we do not actually make the missions. We give contracts to the industry and they build the satellite and they build the technology. And so what is absolutely critical here is to make sure that first, of course, the government will put the, let's say, the resources to help the emergence of economically and commercially viable solutions. Because that is very clear that if we don't support the development of technologies that are either affordable or that have a commercial viability, they will not spread in the community. And a technical agency like ESA has no regulatory power. We cannot force actors to let's say follow a specific practice. We can encourage, of course, but the strength of what we can do is make sure that there are technologies that can be used, and that the community will not be forced to use, but will be glad to use because they will do the right thing and at the same time not impact too much their competitiveness. And to build even on that, so the first step is, of course, there will be a cost, an initial cost, and we need to help developing affordable technologies. But more than that, when I say we need better collision avoidance capability, we need better tracking abilities, all these critical services could be the source of huge business opportunities. You've seen around the world the emergence of a lot of companies doing SST. And with all due respect with my government colleagues, they often do it better than the government. They are able to detect objects that are much smaller than most government capabilities can detect. So the private sector is the place where this innovation can happen. So yes, they're the one who will drive that. And the role of ESA is just make sure that there is the right environment, that there is the right also financial support sometimes. But we are not the solution, they are.
Thank you, Dr. Verspieren. Also, a few words on the Protect Accelerator, its role I believe you're working on. So what is it exactly doing and what are its relationships with the private sector, if I may ask?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. So it was a few years ago, I believe it was 2020, 2021, ESA came to a realization, which was that we develop a lot of wonderful technologies, solutions, but we need to care more about first whether these solutions really answer the need of the communities, whether these solutions are things that could be taken in commercially, and in a way making sure that what we do is useful. And this idea of increasing the impact of what we do at ESA was put under a slogan that is accelerating the use of space in Europe. which means it's great to have technologies at ESA. It's great that ESA does a lot of things. ESA is really proud of itself, and we lead by example, I would say. But it really matters if we have an impact. One single actor being a good actor is not enough. What we want to do is having an impact. And not just what we want to do, but what our member states want to do, because ESA is at the service of member states. And so to accelerate the use of space, the ESA Director General created 3 accelerators, which role is to try to make a better connection between the technical programs at ESA and the community. The 3 accelerators, one is focusing mostly on energy transition, ecological transition related to the Earth observation program at ESA. One is related to crisis response. It's a kind of joint venture of the Telecom Directorate and the Earth Observation Directorate. And the third one is the one that I was actually hired by ESA to establish. It's called the Protect Accelerator. And it depends on my directorate, the Directorate of Operations. And its objective is simple, is to make sure that all the space safety solutions that we develop are spread into the community. And in that sense, it's working extremely closely with the private sector. And when I was mentioning this zero debris mandate that we received from member states, so first, transforming ESA, secondly, doing some outreach. This is what the Protect Accelerator does. So the Protect Accelerator took charge of this second part, that is how to connect our internal transformation with the community and how to make sure that all the investment that we'll make at ESA to become zero debris can help also the rest of the space community to reach similar zero debris objective. And the way we did that is the Zero Debris Charter.
Well, thank you very much. So, again, circling back to the point, what is this Zero Debris Charter? What is the background to its formation, and how many countries have signed it so far?
So, the Zero Debris Charter, as I said, is I already described it succinctly as the answer to this outreach mandate. Concretely, what it meant is that as the ministers say, we have to encourage partners and other actors to pursue a similar path as the zero debris approach at ESA. Similar path doesn't mean push the rest of the community to do exactly what you do at ESA. Similar path. And in particular, as I was mentioning earlier, we are not a regulatory organization, so we are not here to tell the community you have to follow this kind of requirement. Instead, what we thought was, why don't we create a completely open and collaborative process by which the community can agree on what zero debris means? Of course, it's strongly inspired from the ESA zero debris approach, but it's not exactly the same. And so the way we did it is that we thought, okay, we need to agree on a vision. This vision, why don't we call it charter? That is a fairly general term for this kind of instrument. And what we have therefore done is we first at ESA drafted what we thought could be a zero debris charter. So a set of principles, a set of targets aligned with what we believe was a reasonable technical vision, technical objectives for 2030. We released that draft out in the open in the spring of 2023, last year. And during July and August, we received more than 200 comments from all around the world, including a lot from India. And that was telling us, okay, this is a very interesting initiative. We would like to participate. However, what you wrote as target 1, you put that figure. That figure may not be ambitious enough, or maybe too ambitious, or we better, the wording is not clear enough. So why don't we put that? Or why don't we add this criteria, etc. So really every single word of our initial draft received comments. And then on the basis of that, we send a series of other emails to the community, and we said, okay, thanks for providing comments. Now, next step is we organize workshops, completely open. Any entity that feels that they have a stake in sustainability can join. And you come. Some of the workshops were in person at ESA, some were online to ensure that a lot of people could participate, even internationally. And we co-draft. And what was quite new for ESA is that in general, the way this happens when a governmental organization is doing such things, that we draft and we ask people to sign. And we more or less control the product. In this time, the head of the space safety program, so my counterpart, I'm the coordinator of the program, meaning I'm taking care of everything that is not the technical implementation of the mission. I deal with policy, strategy, etc. So my technical counterpart, the manager of the space safety program, who is a very experienced, respected engineer in Europe, was the only ESA representative in the room, and ESA was one voice. It is not an ESA Zero Debris Charter, it's a community charter facilitated by ESA, so there was no reason for ESA to have more power. And I was myself chairing the working group. And so it could have been a bit strange coming from ESA, but sometime I was telling the manager of the space safety program that, sorry, the rest of the community doesn't agree with that. So even if ESA would like to put that in the charter, we don't put it because that's a community initiative. And that we go with what the consensus is, even if it doesn't align exactly with what ESA think is the best. And in the room, it was quite fascinating, and that's the value of the charter, because we had so government organizations, the UK Space Agency, for instance, the French Space Agency, the Netherlands Space Office, the Luxembourg Space Agency, etc. We had big private companies, Airbus Defence and Space, Thales Alenia Space, OHB. We had emerging startups like, I don't know, Aldoria, which is an SST startup. We had propulsion startups. We had international organizations like the European Southern Observatory, like EUMETSAT. We had academic players. We had NGOs. We really had a purely representative crowd. And not only Europeans, we had a few Indian startups that were quite involved. I can remember just on the top of my head, I should have made a list. Space Tug, Digantara, this kind of big names of the Indian new space that were part of these efforts, and that was super interesting. I think that was really good. And so we have developed this charter after 4 workshops of 6 hours each. So it was quite tough. But the strength of it is that it's really a vision of the community. And despite having drafted with around 40 actors around the table at all times, that I have to admit were a majority of European actors, we have managed to have something that is representative of the vision of the community as a whole. Because from this 40 very active, mostly European drafters, we have more than 130 confirmed intents to sign the charter from all around the world, including a lot from India, South Korea, the United States, South America. And 53 have so far been able to attend in-person signing ceremonies, and now we wanted to have the first signature ceremonies in person for making it an event, but now actors can sign in a postal way just by signing it and mailing it to us, or we'll have upcoming signature ceremonies. And you mentioned countries that have signed, so we have so far 12 European countries that have signed. And we are in discussion with actually a lot of the usual international partners of ESA. So of course I cannot really give names and give you hints of who will sign, but you can easily guess who are usually the major partners of ESA. And they're all extremely supportive of the approach. I think one obvious case that I can mention straight away. So of course, there is no confirmation on whether they would sign the charter or not, but at least there is a great alignment of approaches. It's India. ISRO has announced that they want to work on a debris-free, they don't call that zero debris, but debris-free strategy by 2030. So I think that's just wonderful. Two of the greatest agencies, space agencies in this world, committing so strongly to debris mitigation and remediation by 2030. So I'm sure we'll work very closely together on that. There was also a very powerful announcement of NASA during the Space Symposium when they announced a very ambitious strategy on debris mitigation. So a very positive outlook on the future where we see all the major players committing to doing tremendous efforts.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Verspieren. I truly understand it was multi-stakeholder as well as this process was very inclusive. So I just want to understand that this zero debris charter is non-binding. In that case, how is it set to affect international space law norms? Like, is it going to complement the existing guidelines like the UN space debris and the LTS guidelines? And also, what is ESA doing to increase the state practice on these approaches?
So that is a very important question. The charter itself is a technical vision. So the objective of the charter is very simple. We have a community of actors all around the world that want to do the right thing, which is drastically reduce the generation of debris and working on remediation. However, let's say before the charter, there was a tendency of not knowing exactly what were the priorities. So the first aim of the charter is to give concrete priorities so that all those who want to do the right thing can more or less align in their strategy. So at minimum align, at best work together on joint solution. So as such, the charter is not here to affect or change international law. This is a technical vision. This is, even though it's not even an ESA document, but it's not even ESA's role to facilitate evolution of international law. It's not our role. So, however, the second part of your question, yes, it complements strongly international law. And I would say that it builds on international law. Everything that we have done with the charter, and it's even written in the charter that we build on existing multilateral and multi-stakeholder initiatives. What it means is basically we are within the framework of the LTS guidelines. The LTS is the most impressive consensual international space law instrument on debris mitigation and remediation. However, the LTS, by definition, doesn't go into the details of implementation. And so the charter is a contribution to the LTS by saying, if you want to advance on some of the guidelines, because not all the guidelines are about debris mitigation, but on the guidelines that are about debris mitigation, that are about traffic coordination, concrete avenues for technical implementation are outlined in the charter. So it's really in that way that it should be understood. Now, on top of that, what I can add is, because the charter aims to advance the technical state of the art, then down the line, it will also allow to create tighter, better regulations. At the moment, there is a limit to what we can do in terms of regulations, because even if we want to be super ambitious in terms of debris mitigation and remediation regulations, we don't necessarily have the technical building blocks to actually implement them. And a regulation that is not implementable is basically useless. So what we can do is make sure that we push dramatically the technical state of the art to a level that will allow regulators to say, now we can do the things, we can do a drastic reduction of space debris in an affordable, simple way, thanks to the effort of the zero debris community. So there should be no problem putting a strong regulations. This will not damage the industry because we have the solutions. So I think really there are these two roles of the charter: providing concrete implementation avenue to existing international law like the LTS, and secondly, enabling the tightening of regulation by providing concrete implementation building blocks.
Thank you very much. That was very comprehensive. So, you also mentioned that the timeline is 2030. So, where do you see currently with regards to the timeline? Are all the signatories set to achieve this timeline by 2030? Is it ambitious or do you think it's practical?
I will answer the second part first. It's
Right.
both ambitious and practical. And that was the whole point of the, in total, 24 hours of workshop in the period of a month and a half. Most of the discussions, 90% of the discussions, was about debating whether we were striking the right balance between ambition and practicality of implementation. If you're too ambitious, then it cannot be implemented, then it's not a technical vision, it's just a dream. And if you're not ambitious enough, what's the point of doing the whole thing? So, if more than 40 major international space actors agreed on this exact phrasing of the charter, these exact figures, it means that we consider that it was the most ambitious vision that was at the same time practically implementable. So this we are convinced that is feasible. Now, I may surprise you about my answer of your first question. So are all the signatories set to achieve the goal by 2030? No, and they're not supposed to.
Okay.
Uh, for, for,
Interesting.
for a simple reason, for a few reasons actually. First, all the technical targets are not implementable by all. You know, when you are, let's say, Airbus or OHB, your job is to build satellites. They're called large system integrators. They fly a few satellites, but in general, they are not operators, you know, they're just manufacturers. So it doesn't mean anything for them to validate a criteria that is on reducing or debris generation through collision avoidance or clearing orbits after the end of their mission. They don't operate missions. However, what they can do is when they build satellites, build it in a way that will enable the achievement of the target. Similarly, I will not describe the charter in detail, it's a bit technical, but if you look at the target number 5 of the charter that says we need to be able to detect space objects down to at least 3 centimeters or smaller in low Earth orbit. Again, Airbus, they don't operate radars or telescopes to detect debris, so they cannot validate that per se. However, companies involved in SSA or SST, then it is their job. So the question is not about necessarily validating all these targets, but it's about making sure to contribute to their achievement, which means the SST community, ESA, need to be working on better tracking technology. The manufacturers need to be developing better systems and subsystems. Some startup that could be specialized in propulsion will be developing better system for collision avoidance. So what I mean is that very few actors can actually validate all the things. Basically, mostly the operators can, because these are mostly operational constraints. But what we ask when an organization signs the charter is you commit to contribute to the possibility of achieving these targets. So if you have the right technology that can then help an operator do collision avoidance, better tracking, orbital clearance, then you can contribute. But you see what I mean. It's not something that applies to all. It's mostly in the efforts of operators, but the rest of the community should work on enabling this future.
Thank you very much. And this question is basically for our listeners in India. You did mention that India was participating in this initiative earlier and they also submitted comments. So far, how has India participated in the initiative? Can you just give us a few lines of whatever is permitted? Yeah.
Yes. So, first, when you say India has participated, Indian actors have participated. I want to. It's not the Indian government. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not even ISRO directly. So we have had great exchange with ISRO, but this is not ISRO directly. These are really startups. I've mentioned a couple. Apologies for those that that name doesn't come back to my mind. They're quite a nice bunch of Indian startups. Um, now, on I think this raised the question of international partnerships. So going just not, of course, it started in Europe, but if only European actors stop generating debris, this will already be important, but it's not enough. So this international dimension is extremely important. But I would say it didn't start with the Zero Debris Charter. ESA
Yeah.
is engaged in all possible platforms that discuss the fight against debris, that talk about space traffic management and coordination, etc. Especially, I want to mention the IADC, so the Interagency Debris Mitigation Coordination Committee, that was held actually in India, in Bangalore, I suppose, in the last June. This is actually where the chairman of ISRO announced that India is going debris free by 2030. And so
Yes.
ISA is strongly committed to, um, let's say, advancing on these collective endeavors like the IADC mitigation guidelines. And so we are sharing our zero debris experience there. And we are super happy. And we see when we have major international partners like ISRO, the partnership is growing between ISA and ISRO. And so that's wonderful to see that the partnership is not just about exploration, about big Earth observation mission, but also on safety and sustainability. And so of course, we interact on a daily basis with international partners on this question of zero debris. That includes ISRO, that includes startups. But at least at this stage, among the signatories or the future signatories, there are so many major Indian players. I think that's really wonderful, and that's very good to see how much the question of in-orbit services, sustainability, SSA has taken off in India. This is really becoming a major pull for that. So we are delighted to have this community with us.
Yeah, truly. Space sustainability only works if all actors in space are contributing to it. An international partnership, like you rightly said, is an important aspect of this. So you said that the zero debris approach is important for countries to ensure the space remains usable and sustainable, but it is also important to prevent damages to space assets and the associated costs to its operator. But if you see, currently accessing space is costly, especially for many developing and underdeveloped countries. Do you think that the zero debris approach will actually increase the cost for these countries? How will emerging spacefaring countries with little or no technological capability adopt this approach? And will the ESA share technology and expertise to these countries to build the capacity for them? Yeah.
So very important, and it allows me to build a bit on a previous point. So um, you rightfully say that the increased cost is primarily for the operators. Because I mean, let's be really frank. The operators are those who buy the satellite and those who pay for the operations. Manufacturers will have to make investments to have better satellite platforms, etc. But in the end, it's the customer that pays the bill by definition. So the operators will be the one bearing most of the cost. Now, our responsibility and our objective at ESA is to make sure that we invest enough in the development of new technologies, of new satellite platforms, so that the additional cost for operators who would like to do the right thing will be as small as possible, and that this transition towards better practices will be as smooth as possible. And one thing that is often explained to me by my colleagues that are in charge of that from the ESA Clean Space Office, from the ESA Space Debris Office, is that most of the increased cost is actually an investment cost. An investment so that the satellite designs that we have, the satellite platform, are made into platforms with better performance. However, this new, more performant platform is not much more costly than the initial platform. So, sorry if it's not super clear, but what I mean is that there is an investment cost to change into better practices, but then the recurrent cost is not really different. So let's say
Okay.
You have a platform of satellite that generate a lot of debris that would cost 100. You may need to pay, it's completely imaginary figure, but 20 to make it into a platform that generates much less debris. But the new platform will not cost 120 per unit, but maybe 102 or 105. That's kind of the objective that we want to achieve. So it will not be much more costly to do the right thing. And this investment cost in the middle, this transition cost, we consider that it's also our responsibility as government organization to bear most of this cost so that it doesn't impact the industry and that we can have an industry that remains very competitive but is also doing the right thing. Now, another dimension to that is that doing the right thing can also bring competitiveness. Because if you see around the world, there are a lot of countries that are tightening regulations. In the US, you see the FCC that has been reducing the time after the end of the mission, the time for disposal. In the European Union, the European Commission has already announced that they are preparing a space law that would advance quite a lot on safety and sustainability topics. Japan has issued a bit stricter guidelines on in-orbit servicing. So regulations are coming. So if, as a private company, you wait for strong regulations to come in place and you basically hit hardly this regulatory wall, then you will need to quickly adapt. If you start early with strong support from an organization like ESA, when regulations come in place, you already have the solutions, you're the most competitive. And that's also something that the European industry is very conscious of, because of course at ESA, by definition, our first priority is to help the industry of our member states. So the idea is to go in advance of the wave
Right.
and be the most competitive on that front. Then, of course, and I already mentioned it before, this is not necessarily for the operators, but for all those that will provide sustainability services. This will generate massive value. In-orbit services will generate so much money. Good SSA, collision avoidance, support to operations, a better design, cleaner subsystems. There will be so much money to be made in this. Now, there is the question of, let's say, the countries that have maybe less means. But the solution is the same, is that we should work to have the most affordable solutions. And that basically doing the right thing is not something that only those with large means can achieve. That's important. That's absolutely critical, because you said it earlier. Everyone needs to be involved in sustainability for it to work. If we consider that, yes, we are from countries with more means and we can do the right thing and we are so proud, but the rest of the emerging world cannot apply that, that's pointless. That's more than pointless. That's ridiculous. So we need to be able to develop things that are commercially viable, and so that then potentially European companies can provide very affordable, useful services that can be afforded by a lot of emerging players in Africa, in Asia, in South America. That is absolutely critical. We cannot have a wave of emerging countries that do not have the means to do the right thing.
Thank you very much, Dr. Verspieren. So, one final question for you. What are ESA's next step towards a zero debris approach?
So, in a way, very simple and very complex at the same time. First is to further advance on our internal transformation. So, as I said, now we have the world's strictest requirements on the technical design of our missions since November 2023. We went as far as we could with the technical feasibility. So, this is tough for the teams. This is a lot of things to take into account, but it's the right thing to do. We need to show the example. We cannot tell everyone we have to do effort if we don't show that we are doing the most efforts. Then this, as I said, this internal transformation means that we want to be strengthening these technical requirements in 2026 and 2030. But to do it, we need to push the technical state of the art. So we are investing massively. First, at the space safety program. To give you a figure, the space safety program of ESA since 2019 has received approximately 1.2 billion euros of budget from member states. So I think it's probably around $1.5 billion. So it's really the most important international investment on space safety and sustainability. And we hope to increase that even more in the coming years. So there will be very strong investment on advancing the technologies. And as soon as the technology is high enough, we adapt the standards, technology standard, so that we always put the strictest requirement on what we do. And the second point that also follows this very clear mandate from our ministers, which is we use all this wealth of knowledge that is and technologies developed inside ESA to help the community advance. And this is the Zero Debris Charter, the Zero Debris Community, signatories of the Charter, and the various events, workshops that we're organizing, the various contracts that we'll give to the industry. This thing that I've not mentioned yet called the Zero Debris Technical Booklet. That is, again, a community initiative to have the world's most extensive repository of needs and solutions to achieve zero debris. Because at the moment, if you're a company, an operator, a space agency, you want to know what remains to be done to achieve zero debris and what are potential technical avenues. There is no central repository of knowledge. And this central repository of knowledge is now called the Zero Debris Technical Booklet. Again, it's not the ESA booklet. It's a community booklet that we are developing through crowdsourcing, that each part of the booklet is drafted under the leadership of a partner. So these working groups are not chaired by ESA. It's also very important to show that we are just one partner. We're a facilitator, but we don't control the thing. So yes, in summary, continue to advance full speed on our internal transformation with the full support of our member states. And secondly, making sure that following the spirit of the Protect Accelerator, what we do has an impact and that we can accelerate the use of space in Europe and in the world, especially on questions of safety and sustainability, so that we can realize a zero debris future for the world from 2030 onwards.
You mentioned about the booklet. Just one follow-up question. Can the entities here in India contribute to the booklet or be part of the process?
They can and they did. Yes.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yes. So it's again, this is not an ESA zero debris booklet. It is not either an European zero debris technical booklet. This is very clear. This is an international initiative. All the signatories of the charter are part of it, and really the idea is to showcase what you think are needs and what are solutions. And there are so many wonderful solutions developed by Indian startups. The booklet is the right place to feature these technologies, these approaches. So if you're interested in joining this overall zero debris charter initiative, becoming a signatory, being part of the working groups, it's very easy to find. You type on Google or any other search engine, zero debris charter. You will end up on the ESA website. We have plenty of pages, but they always contain the link where you have a form on our website. You can register. I will receive a notification and I will explain to you how to formally sign the charter, what are our events to come, etc.
Oh, thank you very much for the information. I'm sure some entities here in India would be interested, and this is really useful for them. But again, thank you, Dr. Verspieren. Thank you very much for this insightful and long podcast. We hope that our listeners understood the importance of the zero debris approach to ensure that space remains sustainable, and hope that we as humanity succeed in this approach. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. To make sure you don't miss it, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you can get your podcast from. To learn more about our research and team, you can visit us at carnegieindia.org. You can also find us on social media at Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.